When I discovered my fiancé was abusing my son, I lost in a single day the man I thought I loved, the security I had fought to build, and nearly lost my faith in humanity. This is the story of how, at 26, I had to start over for the third time, protecting my child and rebuilding our lives from the ashes of betrayal. Hello, my dears. What a blessing to speak with you today. I'm Clarice Peterson, 78 years young, born in the small town of Oakville, Tennessee, but now I call Riverdale, Ohio my home, a town that embraced me when I desperately needed a fresh start. Come, pull up a chair, like you're here on my porch with me, feeling that pleasant breeze while I enjoy my afternoon tea with some homemade cookies I just baked. These days, I spend my time running my little craft store, Clarice's Crafts, here on Main Street in Riverdale. I started making crochet and embroidery almost 40 years ago when I arrived here with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and determination in my heart. I'd always been handy with needlework since I was a girl, and I began by selling crocheted doilies and embroidered dish towels at the Sunday farmers market. One project here, another there, and before I knew it, I had regular customers. From small crochet pieces, I moved on to larger quilts, kitchen sets, and now I have my little shop that's my greatest pride and livelihood. I'm sitting in the back room of my shop today. It's a simple space, but filled with love. I have my rocking chair that's been with me for 30 years, some pillows I embroidered myself, and on the wall, photographs of my granddaughter Isabella, my dear Catherine's daughter. On the side table, there's always a pot of chamomile tea and a plate of cookies. I need to keep my energy up for my customers, you know? And you, my dears watching me now, tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after lunch, or in the evening with family gathered around? I always read all the comments and feel so happy knowing where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this. Grandma's stories, let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Oh, but before I continue, I'd like to ask a small favor. Please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this grandma continue sharing her stories with more people. It's just a minute of your time, but it makes all the difference in my heart. You know, my dears, today I'm going to share a story I've kept for a long time. A story of pain, but also of new beginnings. It's not easy to talk about certain subjects, but I believe sharing our experiences can help others who might be going through difficult times. It's about how, in a single day, my life took a complete turn, and how I needed to find strength where I didn't even know I had it to rebuild everything again. About how sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. But to understand this story, I need to go back in time, to my childhood in Oakville, when I was just a dreamy girl who couldn't imagine the challenges life had in store for me. I was born in Oakville in 1947, in a simple clapboard house with a tin roof that heated up in summer and chilled in winter. My father, Joseph Peterson, worked in the cotton fields in the region. A stern man of few words, but honest as they come. My mother, Dorothy Mae Peterson, was a skilled seamstress who made dresses for the town girls, especially for weddings and celebrations. It was from her that I learned my first stitches, a skill that years later would become my livelihood. We were 4 siblings, me, the oldest, then came Owen, 2 years younger and always getting into trouble. Irene, who passed away from scarlet fever at just 5 years old, a pain my mother carried until the end of her life, and the youngest, David, who now lives in Cincinnati, and we rarely speak. The distances of life, you know how it is. Our house was on Blossom Street, close to the Baptist church. We had a huge backyard where Mom grew everything: sweet potatoes, pumpkins, corn, along with medicinal herbs that she knew like the back of her hand. Store-bought medicine is only for emergencies, she'd say, while preparing teas for whatever ailment we might have. At the back of the yard was a blackberry bush that was the joy of all the neighborhood children. When it fruited, every kid in the neighborhood would gather around. My childhood was simple, but we never lacked food, thanks to my parents' hard work. We'd wake up with the rooster's crow before the sun even appeared. I helped Mom with household chores while my brothers went to the fields with Dad. Afterward, we'd walk to school, 3 miles on foot, rain or shine. Oakville Elementary was small, with just 4 classrooms, but Miss Eleanor taught us with such care that I still remember the poems we memorized. On Sunday afternoons, after church, the entertainment was the town square. The boys played ball, the girls played Ring Around the Rosie, and the adults set chairs on the sidewalk to chat. The square's bandstand had a small band that played every other week, and it was quite the celebration. I loved to dance, even if it was just with the other girls, spinning until I got dizzy. My father watched from a distance, serious, but with a gleam in his eye that betrayed his pride. I grew up like this, between studies, household chores, and the embroidery Mom taught me. By 12, I was doing cross-stitch and crochet beautifully. The neighbors would order doilies and tray cloths, and I was so proud to help with the household budget. Dad spoke little, but on those days, he'd come home with a piece of candy or a bit of molasses taffy for me, his silent way of saying he was proud. But not everything was rosy. Our life was too simple, and that weighed on us. I remember one day when I needed a new notebook for school, but there was no money. I cried in secret, but the next day, Mom appeared with a notebook she had earned by sewing late into the night for the pharmacist's wife. "Education is the only inheritance we can guarantee for you," she would say, with those tired but determined eyes. It was during this time that I noticed the first changes at home. Dad started coming home later, sometimes smelling of whiskey. Mom kept quiet, but I saw the tears she tried to hide while finishing her sewing by lamplight. Owen, my brother, started talking back to Dad, and arguments were frequent. I would hide with David under the table, covering his ears so he wouldn't hear the shouting. One night, the fight was bad. Dad came home late, and Mom asked where he'd been. He didn't like the question, and, well, it was the first time I saw my mother with a bruised face. The next morning, she was in the kitchen as if nothing had happened, but her black eye told another story. "I hit the corner of the cabinet," was the explanation she gave to the neighbors, but everyone knew the truth. Back then, these things stayed behind closed doors. Nobody meddled in husband and wife disputes. It was in this environment that I entered adolescence, torn between the fear of what was happening at home and dreams of a better life. I remember that at 13, in 1960, I received my first radio as a gift from Uncle Albert, my mother's brother, who lived in Nashville and always appeared with presents when he visited. That little black radio was my window to the world. I listened to music, news, and dreamed of knowing different places, far from that reality that was becoming more difficult each day. At night, lying on my pallet in the room I shared with Irene before she passed, I would imagine what my life would be like when I grew up. I wanted to be a teacher, have a pretty house with flowers in the window, and children running in the yard. I dreamed of a gentle husband who would treat me with kindness, different from what I saw between my parents. These dreams gave me strength to endure the difficult days, when food was scarce, or when the atmosphere at home became too heavy. At 15, I started selling my crochet pieces at the Sunday market. I would get up before dawn, arrange everything in a wicker basket, and go with Mom to the square. We would spread a cloth on the ground and display our work. The money wasn't much, but it helped with household expenses, especially after Dad lost his job in the fields because of drinking. Those were difficult times, but they taught me the value of work and perseverance. It was at this market that at 17 I met William, a young man from Millsville who came to sell cheese in Oakville. Tall, with black hair and deep brown eyes, he always stopped at our cloth to chat. At first, I was shy, but gradually I got used to his presence and anxiously awaited each Sunday. He would tell me about the farm where he worked, about the dairy cows and the cheese-making process, and I listened to everything fascinated, as if it were the most interesting story in the world. Mom noticed my interest in the cheese guy and always found a way to step away a bit, going to talk with other vendors, giving us a few minutes alone. "He seems like a good young man," she commented once on the way home. And he really was. William was hardworking, respectful, and had big dreams. He wanted to have his own farm one day. But our story had barely begun when, at 18, I faced the greatest loss of my life until then. My mother fell ill with a heart problem and passed away within weeks. The world fell apart. Dad, who was already surrendered to drink, got even worse. It fell to me, the eldest daughter, to take over the house and care for my brothers. Owen, who was already 20, soon left home, saying he couldn't stand living under the same roof as Dad anymore. David, at just 12, came to depend entirely on me. During this period, William was my safe harbor. He came to visit us whenever he could, brought cheese and sometimes a bit of meat, and helped me maintain hope for better days. He asked me to be his girlfriend 6 months after Mom's death, and even with all the sadness in my heart, I accepted. I needed that ray of light in the darkness my life had become. It was during this time that I began to dream of a life away from there, with William. He talked about taking me to Millsville, said that there we could start a new life, away from painful memories and the heavy atmosphere our home had become, with Dad increasingly lost in drink. David could come with us, of course, and continue his studies in the new town. At 19 in 1966, I became pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it happened. When I told William, I expected to see fear or hesitation in his eyes, but what I saw was genuine joy. "We'll get married," he said, without blinking. Dad, who barely cared about what happened at home anymore, just shrugged when I told him the news. The only thing he said was, "At least a man is going to take responsibility." In December of that year, Michael was born, my firstborn. A strong baby, with his father's eyes, and, as we would discover later, a difficult temperament that we didn't know where it came from. William was ecstatic with his son, and for a few months, it seemed that we would finally find some peace. But life had other plans. When Michael was just 5 months old, William suffered an accident on the farm where he worked. A bull attacked him, and even though he was quickly helped, he didn't survive his injuries. Suddenly, I found myself a widow at 20, with a small baby, a teenage brother to raise, and a father who was more like a ghost around the house. That was the second major blow in my life. I lost my footing again. How would I go on? How would I raise my son without his father? How would I handle everything alone? There were nights and nights of silent crying, so as not to wake the baby sleeping beside me. But, as they say around here, God works in mysterious ways, and I still didn't know that, years later, I would meet another man who would change my life, for better and for worse. Life as a single mother and widow in Oakville wasn't easy. After William passed, I had to redouble my efforts to support the household. My father, Joseph, no longer helped with anything. On the contrary, he spent what little money he could get on whiskey at Tommy's bar. David, my youngest brother, was 14 and started working delivering packages around town to help with expenses, but he was still a boy. Michael grew strong and healthy, but from an early age showed a temperament that worried me. When he turned 2, his tantrums were so intense that the neighbors commented, "Never seen a child with such anger," said Mrs. Henderson next door. I tried to raise him with all the love I could, compensating for his father's absence, but I confess that sometimes it was difficult. Without a male presence, he seemed to test my limits at every moment. In 1970, when Michael was almost 4, something happened that would change the course of our lives. The fabric store in downtown Oakville, Fashion Fabrics, was hiring a seamstress to make alterations to customers' clothes. With the experience I learned from my mother, I got the job. The salary was better than what I earned selling crochet at the market, and it even had fixed hours, from 8 to 5, Monday through Saturday. The store owner was Edward Montgomery, a man in his 40s, a widower, who had come from Madison to open the business in Oakville. Tall, with an elegant bearing, dark brown eyes, and an always well-trimmed mustache, he had a gentle way of treating employees and customers. Unlike the men I knew, Edward spoke softly, never raised his voice, and always had a word of encouragement. At first, our relationship was strictly professional. I sewed, he managed the store. But gradually, he began to show interest in my story. He asked about Michael, about how I managed everything alone. On some occasions, when I needed to leave early to pick up my son at Mrs. Jenkins's house, who watched him during the day, Edward made a point of giving me a ride in his car, a green Chevrolet that was the only car of that type in town. "You're an admirable woman, Clarice," he told me once as he dropped me off at home. "Raising a child alone, taking care of your father and your brother, and still working with such dedication, not just anyone could do it." Those words touched me deeply. How long had it been since I received a compliment? How long had it been since I felt valued? Since William's death, 3 years before, my life had been only work and responsibilities. Edward was the first to see the woman behind the mother, the daughter, the sister. Over time, our friendship grew. He began to visit my home on Sundays, always bringing some treat for Michael and a small gift for me. A nice fabric, a cheap perfume, small gestures that warmed my heart. My father grumbled in the corners, suspicious of the intentions of the city man, as he called Edward. But David liked him, mainly because Edward always took an interest in my brother's studies and encouraged him to stay in school. Michael, on the other hand, reacted strangely to Edward's presence. At 4, he already showed jealousy that wasn't normal. When Edward arrived, he would hide behind my legs or under the table. If Edward tried to approach or offered a candy, Michael would turn his face away. "It's just shyness," I would tell Edward, who accepted the situation with patience. "He'll get used to me with time." At Christmas 1971, Edward surprised me with an official dating proposal. We were sitting on my porch after Christmas lunch, a simple lunch, but one that he had made a point of improving, bringing a roasted chicken from town and a bottle of wine. David had taken my father, already quite drunk, inside, and Michael was playing in the yard with a wooden car that Edward had specially made for him. "Clarice," he said, holding my hands in his, "I know it may seem early, but life has already taken too much time from us. I want to take care of you and Michael, be a father to him and a companion to you. Will you date me?" My heart raced. I hadn't expected that, not so soon. I still carried memories of William, still felt, in a way, connected to him. But at the same time, the loneliness weighed heavily, and the idea of having someone by my side, someone good and kind like Edward, was tempting. "I need to think," I replied honestly. "It's not just for me, understand? I have Michael, and he's still getting used to you." Edward smiled, understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." I spent that night awake, weighing the pros and cons. Edward was a good man. Of that I had no doubt. He had a stable financial situation, treated me with respect and affection, and seemed genuinely interested in being a father to Michael. He represented the possibility of a better life, away from the difficulties I faced. The next day, I accepted the dating proposal. Edward was radiant. We agreed to take it slow, especially because of Michael. In the months that followed, Edward did everything to win over my son. He brought presents, played with him, tried to involve him in activities. Sometimes it seemed to work. Michael would smile, agree to play, but he would soon return to his usual reserve. "He misses his father," I justified. "It's difficult for a child to understand these things." Edward accepted my explanations, but I noticed his growing frustration with Michael's rejection. One night, when we thought Michael was sleeping, he vented, "I've tried everything, Clarice. I give presents, I'm patient, I show interest, but it seems that the more I try, the more he rejects me." Before I could respond, we heard a noise. Michael was at the door of the living room, staring at Edward with those dark eyes, so similar to William's, but with an expression I had never seen in his father. Was it a look of hatred? No, it couldn't be. He was only 5 years old. "I don't like him, Mom," said Michael, pointing to Edward. "He's not my dad. My dad died." Those words, spoken with such harshness by such a small child, fell like a stone between us. I ran to hug my son, trying to calm him, while Edward stood there, paralyzed, not knowing how to react. That night, after putting Michael to bed, I had a long conversation with Edward. I explained that we would need more time, that it was natural for Michael to feel confused and afraid of losing his real father's place in our lives. "I have patience, Clarice," said Edward, caressing my face. "But I also have plans for us. I want us to get married. I want to take you to a better life. I'm thinking of opening a branch of the store in Madison or maybe in Riverdale, where business is growing. We could start over, the three of us, away from the painful memories here." The idea of a fresh start attracted me. Oakville held so many sad memories. My mother's death, William's death, my father's decline. Perhaps a change was exactly what Michael needed to accept Edward in our lives. The following months were of planning. Edward went back and forth between Oakville and Riverdale, preparing everything for our move. He found a house for us to rent, began setting up the new store, and spoke excitedly about the good schools Michael could attend there. Everything seemed to be heading towards a new life, full of possibilities. On the eve of my 26th birthday, in May 1973, Edward asked me to marry him. It was a simple proposal without grand gestures, just the two of us sitting on the park bench, while Michael played on the bandstand with other children. "I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, Clarice," he said, as he handed me a small box with a delicate ring, a small blue stone surrounded by tiny brilliants. "It's not much, but it was the best I could buy now with the expenses of the new store. I promise to give you a dignified and happy life." With tears in my eyes, I accepted. Michael was 6.5, already in school, and although he was still reserved with Edward, he seemed less hostile. Sometimes he even let Edward help him with homework or take him for ice cream in the square. I thought that, with time, he would end up accepting Edward as part of the family. We decided that the wedding would be at the end of that year, shortly before Christmas. It would be a simple ceremony, just with those closest to us at Oakville's Baptist Church. Afterward, we would move to Riverdale to start the new year already in the new city. But, as I discovered so many times, life rarely follows our plans. As the wedding date approached, Michael began to change. The tantrums returned, more intense than ever. He refused to try on the suit that Edward bought for him to wear at the wedding, cried when he saw me trying on the wedding dress, a simple but beautiful model that Mrs. Doris was making custom for me. "I don't want to go live somewhere else," he would scream. "I don't want you to marry him." I tried to talk, to explain that it would be good for us, that we would have a better life, that Edward loved us and wanted to take care of us. But it was like talking to a wall. Michael would close up, cross his arms, and remain silent, those dark eyes staring at me with a mixture of hurt and anger that broke my heart. David, my brother, who was then 19 and working at the town pharmacy, tried to help. "He's just afraid of the change," he would say, trying to reassure me. "Children are like that. They get attached to places, to friends. When he gets there, he'll make new friends and forget all this." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, that Michael would overcome it as soon as we were established in Riverdale with a new and better life. But there was something in his look, something that deeply troubled me. A week before the wedding, I found Michael in the yard, hidden behind the blackberry bush, crying compulsively. I sat down beside him on the beaten earth, not caring about the dress that would get dirty, and hugged him. "What is it, my son? Why so much crying?" Between sobs, he said, "If you marry him, you'll forget my real dad. And if you forget him, I'll forget too, because I was very small. I don't want to forget my dad." My heart tightened. So that was it then. All that time, that resistance, was fear of losing his father's memory. I explained, with all the patience and love I could gather, that we would never forget William, that he would always be the real father, that Edward would be a second father, someone who would help us, but never replace William. "I promise that we will always talk about him, always remember how good he was and how much he loved you," I guaranteed, wiping his tears with the corner of my apron. "And when you want to know what he was like, I will tell you everything, every detail that I remember." Michael seemed to calm down a bit with this promise. That night, he slept clutching the only photo we had of William, a black and white portrait where he appeared smiling, with that peaceful way he always had. The days leading up to the wedding were relatively peaceful. Michael was quiet, but he didn't throw tantrums anymore. He helped with the preparations in his own way, carrying small things, observing everything with attention. I came to think that he had finally understood, that he had accepted the idea that Edward would be part of our lives. Then the wedding day arrived. It was December 22nd, 1973, a sunny Saturday, one of those typical of late year in Tennessee. The ceremony would be at 4 p.m. to take advantage of when the heat had already diminished a bit. I was at my godmother Celeste's house, who lived 2 blocks from the church, getting ready with her help and some friends. My dress was simple but elegant, made of ivory satin fabric, without many details. We couldn't spend much, with all the move ahead. Michael was with David at our house, getting ready. Edward would come to pick them up to go together to the church, while I would arrive a little later, as tradition dictates. Everything seemed to be going well, until I heard desperate knocks at the door. It was David, breathless, his face pale with worry. "Clarice," he said, barely able to breathe. "Michael is gone." "Gone? What do you mean gone?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. David ran his hand through his hair, nervous. Everything was fine. He had bathed, was dressed in his new suit. Edward arrived to pick us up, and while I was finishing getting ready, I left the 2 in the living room. When I returned, there was no sign of Michael. Edward said he asked to go to the yard to get something and never came back. I jumped up, completely forgetting about the dress, the hairstyle, everything. "We need to find him. He must be hiding somewhere." I left Godmother Celeste's house in a hurry, with David by my side. My head was buzzing with worries. What if Michael had really run away? What if something worse had happened? He was only 7 years old, just a child. When we got home, Edward was on the porch, visibly upset. He had taken off his suit jacket and unbuttoned his shirt, and was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "I've looked everywhere," he said as soon as he saw us. "At the neighbors' houses, at the field where he plays ball, even at the school I passed by. Nobody has seen him." By this time, the sun was already beginning to set, and the time of the ceremony was approaching. The guests would certainly already be arriving at the church, not knowing what was happening. "I'll let the pastor know we'll have to postpone," said David, always practical, "and I'll ask people for help to look for Michael." While David was leaving, I stood there, standing in the middle of the living room, still in my wedding dress, feeling as if the world was crumbling around me. Edward approached, trying to comfort me. "We'll find him, Clarice. He can't have gone far." But there was something strange in his tone, something I couldn't identify at that moment. He was worried, yes, but also irritated, confused and scared as I was. I let it pass. The following hours were a blur. The news of Michael's disappearance spread through small Oakville, and soon we had a search group formed by neighbors, friends, and even some of the wedding guests. They scoured every corner of the town, calling his name, checking abandoned houses, the river that cut through the town, the nearby woods. I stayed at home in case he returned, alternating between periods of desperate crying and fervent prayers. Edward remained by my side the whole time, trying to calm me, although he himself seemed increasingly tense. It was only when the night was already late, around 10 o'clock, that we heard a commotion in the street. I ran to the door and saw Mr. Johnson, the owner of the corner store, carrying Michael in his arms. My son was dirty, with his suit torn in some places, but he seemed physically well. "I found him sleeping under the old bridge, near the river," explained Mr. Johnson. "I heard a noise when I passed by and went to check. The poor little thing was all curled up there, exhausted." I took my son in my arms, feeling such great relief that my legs almost gave way. Michael woke up with the movement and upon seeing me began to cry, clinging to me as if his life depended on it. "Never do that again, my son," I whispered through tears. "You almost killed me with worry." When everyone had gone, and I finally managed to calm Michael enough for him to sleep, I sat in the living room with Edward and David. The wedding, of course, had been cancelled. The few foods we had prepared for the small reception were distributed among the neighbors who helped in the search. "Why would he do this?" asked Edward, his voice laden with frustration. "Run away like this on the day of our wedding? After everything I've done for you?" Something in the way he spoke bothered me. "He's just a scared child, Edward. He's afraid of losing what he knows, of losing his father's memories." "The father he barely knew," Edward retorted, raising his voice more than I had ever heard. "I've been trying to be a father to him for almost 3 years, giving everything I can, and he repays me like this?" "I think we'd better talk tomorrow," intervened David, noticing that the situation was becoming tense. "We're all tired and stressed. Things will look better in the daylight." Edward took a deep breath, regaining his composure. "You're right, David. I'm sorry, Clarice. It's just that I had so many plans for today, for us." That night, I slept beside Michael, holding his hand, thanking God for bringing him back safe and sound. But a restlessness grew inside me. The next day, when I tried to talk to him about what happened, Michael completely closed up. "I didn't want the wedding," was all I could get out of him, between his teeth. We rescheduled the wedding for the end of January, deciding that it would be even simpler, just at the courthouse, without a party. The date of our move to Riverdale was also postponed, since the store wasn't completely ready yet. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a change in Edward. The patience he had always shown with Michael seemed to be running out. He spoke to him more harshly, no longer brought small gifts, and sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, he cast glances laden with, could it be resentment? Michael, in turn, became more introverted each day. He no longer played with the other children as before, spent hours alone in the yard, and I began to receive complaints from the school about his aggressive behavior with classmates. One afternoon, upon returning from the store, I found Michael huddled in a corner of the room, crying softly. When I asked what had happened, he simply shook his head, refusing to speak. It took a lot of insistence for him to finally say something. "He hates me, Mom," he murmured between sobs. "And he said he's going to send me to a boarding school when you get married." I was shocked. "Who said that? Edward?" Michael nodded, wiping his tears with his shirt sleeve. "He would never do that, my son. You must have misunderstood." But a seed of doubt had already been planted. That same night, when Edward came to visit us, I waited for Michael to go to sleep to confront him. "Did you tell my son that you're going to send him to a boarding school after we get married?" Edward seemed genuinely surprised. "Of course not. Where did he get that from?" "That's what he told me today. He was crying, Edward, terrified." He sighed deeply. "Clarice, you know Michael. He makes things up, distorts what he hears. Maybe I mentioned that in Riverdale there are good schools, some even with boarding for those who live far away, but I never, ever said I would send him to one." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Michael had indeed misunderstood, or maybe even made it up in a desperate attempt to prevent the wedding. But a small voice inside me began to question if I really knew Edward as well as I thought. The days leading up to the new wedding date were tense. Edward spent more time in Riverdale, taking care of the new store, and when he was in Oakville, the atmosphere between him and Michael was heavy, laden with silences and hostile looks. A week before the scheduled date, Edward came with news that caught me completely by surprise. "I've been thinking," he said, as we had dinner, just the two of us, as Michael had refused to sit at the table with us. "Maybe it's better for you and Michael to move to Riverdale right after the wedding, while I stay here a bit longer, until I resolve everything with the Oakville store." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I thought we would all go together, as a family." "And we will, eventually. But the house in Riverdale is already ready, and the school there is much better for Michael. You could start organizing our life there while I finish things here." The proposal seemed strange to me. This wasn't the original plan. Besides, how would I adapt alone in an unknown city with a son who was clearly disturbed by the whole situation? "I don't know, Edward. I'd prefer if we all went together." Michael is already scared about the move, and without you there to help us at the beginning—" He interrupted, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "It's always Michael, isn't it? Everything revolves around what he wants, what he feels. What about us, Clarice? When are we going to think about us?" Those words hurt me deeply. "He's my son, Edward. He's only 7 years old. Of course I need to consider what's best for him. And what's best for him is to have a father who can give him everything he needs," Edward retorted. "Good school, comfortable house, a future. That's what I'm trying to provide, but it seems that neither you nor he appreciate my efforts." The discussion ended in a stalemate, with Edward leaving irritated and me staying behind, with more doubts than ever about whether we were taking the right path. In the days that followed, Edward seemed to regret his outburst. He went back to being the gentle and attentive man I knew, bringing gifts for me and Michael, speaking animatedly about our future in Riverdale. He agreed that we would all go together after the wedding, as originally planned. I wanted to believe that everything would be fine, that it was just the stress of the preparations causing those small fissures. But deep down, I knew something had changed between us. The eve of the wedding arrived, January 25th, 1974. This time, we opted not to do anything special. No wedding dress, no church. Just a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a lunch with the closest family. Edward would come from Riverdale in the morning, we would go together to the courthouse at noon, and the next day we would all leave for our new life. In the morning, I prepared Michael carefully, talking to him once more about how things would be from then on, promising that we would always be together, that Riverdale would be a new beginning for all of us. He listened in silence, those dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sometimes frightened me. When I finished, he simply nodded and went to the yard, where he sat under the blackberry bush, his favorite spot. Edward arrived around 10 o'clock, bringing with him a suitcase with new clothes for me and Michael, gifts to start our new life. He was in a good mood, full of plans and stories about the new store, about how Riverdale was growing, and the opportunities we would have there. I left the two in the living room while I went to get ready. I put on a light blue outfit, simple but elegant, which I had made especially for the occasion. When I returned to the living room, about half an hour later, I found only Edward, sitting on the sofa with a tense expression. "Where's Michael?" I asked, already feeling a tingling of concern. "He went to change clothes," Edward replied, without looking me in the eyes. "He said he didn't want to wear the clothes I brought, that he preferred his own." I went to the room that Michael shared with David, who wasn't home at that moment, as he had gone to get our father for the ceremony. The door was closed, something unusual. "Michael?" I called, knocking lightly. "Is everything okay, my son?" There was no response. I knocked again, a little harder. Silence. The concern turned to alarm. I tried to turn the doorknob, but the door was locked from the inside. "Michael, open the door right now!" Nothing. I ran back to the living room, my heart racing. "Edward, the door is locked and he's not responding." Edward jumped up and went with me to the bedroom door. He tried to force the doorknob, then knocked hard, calling for Michael. When we continued without a response, he stepped back a few paces and with a sudden movement charged against the door with his shoulder. The old wood easily gave way, and the door opened with a bang. The room was empty. The window, which gave to the yard, was open. Under the bed, Michael's suitcase was also no longer there. "I can't believe he ran away again," exclaimed Edward, his voice trembling with anger. "After everything we talked about." I ran to the yard, calling for Michael. Nothing. I went to the street, looking in all directions. No sign of him. Despair began to take hold of me. "I'll look for him," said Edward, taking the car keys. "You stay here in case he comes back. Don't worry, Clarice. I'll find him." I stood there, standing on the sidewalk, watching Edward's car drive away, feeling as if I was reliving a nightmare. Once again, on my wedding day, Michael had disappeared. Once again, all plans were ruined. The hours dragged on. David and my father arrived and were soon mobilized for the search. Neighbors were notified. The same people who had already searched for Michael the last time returned to scour the town. The day advanced, the time of the ceremony at the courthouse passed, and still no Michael. Edward returned several times, always to give discouraging news. Nobody had seen my son, nobody knew where he could be. With nightfall, the despair intensified. What if he had gone further this time? What if something serious had happened? There were so many terrible possibilities running through my head that I could barely think. That's when we heard the sound of a car stopping abruptly in front of the house. I ran to the door, expecting to see David, who had gone out again to search the outskirts of town. But it was Edward, and from his face, I immediately realized that something was very wrong. "I found him," he said, his voice hoarse. "But you won't like to know where." "Where?" I asked, feeling the blood freeze in my veins. "Where is he? Is he okay?" "Physically, yes," Edward answered, with a bitter tone. "He's at the Riverside Motel, at the edge of town. You know who he's with? With Teresa, my ex-employee, the one I fired 3 months ago for theft." I didn't understand. What would Michael be doing with her? We barely know her. "Exactly what I asked myself," said Edward, entering the living room and throwing himself on the sofa, exhausted. So I waited outside, and I heard the conversation between the two. "You know what your son was doing? Telling her all the lies he made up about me, that I mistreat him, that I threatened him, that I'm going to send him away from you. But why? Why would he do that? Because he wants to destroy me, Clarice. From the beginning, he doesn't want to see me with you, doesn't want us to be a family. And he chose the perfect person for his lies. Teresa has hated me since I fired her, and it seems she's been planning revenge. The two make a fine pair." My head was spinning. None of that made sense. How would Michael, a 7-year-old child, have met Teresa to the point of trusting her to run away? How would he have reached the motel alone? "I want to see him," I said, determined. "Let's go there now." "I already brought him," Edward replied, and went to the door. He opened it and made a gesture. Michael entered, head down, dragging his small suitcase. I ran to hug him, checking if he was really okay, feeling immense relief to have him back. "Why, son? Why did you run away again?" Michael looked sideways at Edward, then fixed his eyes on the floor. "I wanted to go away, far away." "Aren't you going to tell your mother the truth?" asked Edward, his voice laden with accusation. "About the lies you've been spreading?" Michael raised his face, his eyes shining with withheld tears. "They're not lies." "Enough," I intervened, realizing that the situation was becoming unsustainable. "Michael, go to your room now. We'll talk later." "Edward, we need to talk. Just the two of us." Reluctantly, Michael went to the room, but not before casting a final look at Edward. A look that I couldn't decipher at the time, but that today, so many years later, I recognize as being of pure fear. When we were alone, Edward collapsed on the sofa, running his hands over his face in a gesture of fatigue and frustration. "I don't know what else to do, Clarice. I've tried everything with this boy. But he simply hates me, and now he's trying to turn people against me, making up absurd stories." "What stories exactly did he tell this Teresa?" I asked, trying to understand the situation. Edward hesitated for a moment. "Absurd things. That I threaten him when you're not around. That I promise to send him to a reformatory if he doesn't behave after we get married. That I hit him." I was shocked. And this woman, Teresa, believed all this? Of course she did. She's hated me since I fired her for taking money from the register. She probably put these ideas in his head to get revenge on me. But how did Michael meet her? How did he know where to find her? Another hesitation. I'm not sure. Maybe he overheard some conversation of mine when I talked about her to you. The motel isn't far, and everyone in town knows she works there now. He's a smart boy, must have asked around. Something in that explanation didn't sound right to me, but I was too exhausted, too emotionally drained to question more deeply at that moment. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling completely lost. "I think it's clear we can't get married tomorrow," Edward replied, sighing. "Not under these conditions. Maybe Maybe we need to rethink everything, Clarice. What do you mean? I mean that maybe you're right. Maybe we need to go slower. Give Michael more time to get used to the idea. Or maybe— He hesitated again. Maybe we should consider the possibility that this isn't going to work. Those words fell like stones on my heart. After all the planning, all the promises, Edward was considering giving up on us? You don't want to marry me anymore? I asked, my voice trembling. It's not that, he hastened to say, taking my hands in his. I love you, Clarice, and I want to build a life with you. But maybe we need to rethink how to do this. Maybe we need to give Michael more time to get used to the idea. Or maybe it's better for me to go to Riverdale alone first, establish everything there, and then you join me when Michael is more prepared. That night, we didn't reach a definitive conclusion. Edward returned to his house, and I was left alone with my thoughts and concerns. When I finally gathered the courage to talk to Michael about what happened, he refused to speak. He sat there on the bed, hugging the pillow, his eyes fixed on the wall, as if he were in another world. The next morning, Edward returned. He seemed calmer, more decided. We sat in the living room while Michael was in the yard, under David's supervision. I've been thinking all night, said Edward, and I think I found a solution. I'll go to Riverdale next week, as planned. I'll prepare everything for our arrival, the house, the store, everything. In a month, when everything is ready, you and Michael come. This will give you time to talk to him, prepare him better for the move. And when you arrive there, everything will already be in order. It will be easier for him to adapt. The idea seemed sensible. A transition period could be good for everyone. I agreed, and it was decided. We would postpone the wedding until we were all established in Riverdale. Edward left the following week, taking with him his things and some merchandise for the new store. The weeks that followed were of a strange calm. Michael seemed more at ease, knowing that Edward was no longer in town. He returned to playing, to smiling occasionally, although he would still close up like an oyster whenever I tried to talk about our future move. Edward called every day, telling about the preparations, about how the house was looking nice, about the schools he had visited for Michael. He seemed genuinely committed to making everything work out. A month passed quickly, and the day of our departure arrived. Michael was quiet, but resigned. David helped us load the luggage onto the bus, promising that he would visit us as soon as possible. My father, now almost always in a state of drunkenness, barely noticed our departure. The journey from Oakville to Riverdale took almost a full day, with several transfers. We arrived exhausted, already late in the afternoon. Edward was waiting for us at the bus station with a radiant smile. He hugged me at length and tried to do the same with Michael, who dodged, hiding behind me. Don't worry, said Edward, disguising his disappointment. He'll get used to it with time. The house that Edward had rented was in a quiet neighborhood, not far from the center of town. It was larger and more comfortable than our house in Oakville, with 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, kitchen, and even a small garden in the back. Everything was clean and organized, with new furniture and colorful curtains that Edward had bought especially for us. Do you like it? He asked, as he showed me the room that would be Michael's, with a new bed and even a small desk for his studies. It's perfect, I replied, moved by the care he had dedicated to every detail. The first days in Riverdale were of adaptation. Edward left early to work at the new store, which was a few blocks away, and returned at the end of the day, always bringing some novelty. A sweet for Michael, a magazine for me, small attentions that showed his affection. We enrolled Michael in the local school, and to my relief, he seemed to adapt well, making new friends quickly. At night, after Michael went to sleep, Edward and I would talk about the future, about the wedding date, about how things finally seemed to be falling into place. We decided that we would get married in 2 months, time enough for Michael to completely settle into the new life. The weeks went by, and a routine began to form. In the morning, Edward would leave for the store, Michael would go to school, and I would take care of the house. In the afternoon, I began to help Edward at the store, making small repairs to customers' clothes as I did in Oakville. Michael stayed at school until 3 and then went home, where a neighbor, Mrs. Gwen, kept an eye on him until I arrived. Everything seemed to be going well, until I began to notice changes in Michael's behavior. He became quiet again, isolated. At school, the teacher commented that he had become aggressive with classmates. At home, he barely spoke, ate little, and sometimes I would find him crying alone in his room. When I tried to talk, he closed up even more. "It's nothing," he would say, turning his face to the wall. Or then, "I miss Oakville," a response that seemed plausible, considering the recent move. Edward also noticed the change, but had a different interpretation. "It's just an adaptation phase," he would say. "All children go through this when they change cities. Soon he'll be fine again." I wanted to believe him, but something inside me said there was more. I began to pay more attention, to observe Michael when he didn't know he was being observed. I noticed that he visibly shrank when Edward came near, that he avoided being alone with him at all costs. One night, I woke up to a strange noise. Edward wasn't in the bed beside me. I got up, worried, and went to Michael's room. The door was ajar, and from inside came whispered voices. I approached carefully, trying not to make noise. "It's going to be all right," I heard Edward say, in a tone of voice I had never heard before. "Your mother will never know. It's our secret, understand? And if you tell, you know what will happen, don't you?" I couldn't hear Michael's response, but Edward's tone was unequivocally threatening. My heart raced, a feeling of nausea invaded me. What was happening there? Before I could react, I heard Edward's footsteps approaching the door. I ran back to the bedroom, lay down in bed, and pretended to sleep. Minutes later, Edward returned, lying down beside me as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep anymore that night. My mind was buzzing with possibilities, all too terrible to be considered. I wanted to believe that I had misunderstood, that there was an innocent explanation for that conversation. But the pieces were beginning to fit together. Michael's fear, his refusal to be near Edward, his increasingly withdrawn behavior. The next day, after Edward left for the store, I decided not to take Michael to school. We needed to talk, seriously. "Son," I began, sitting beside him on the sofa. "You know you can tell me anything, don't you? Anything at all." He nodded without looking me in the eyes. "Is there something happening that's making you sad or scared?" Silence. "Michael, look at me. Is it about Edward? Has he done something that scared you?" His eyes filled with tears, and at that moment I knew that my worst fears were real. With a sob, he threw himself into my arms, crying convulsively. Between sobs, the words began to come out, fragmented, terrible. Since our arrival in Riverdale, Edward had begun to enter his room at night when he thought I was sleeping. At first it was just to talk, he said. Then the touches began. He began to tell Michael that he needed to learn to be a man, and that if he told me anything, we would both be sent back to Oakville, where we would starve without his help. Each word was like a stab in my heart. How had I not noticed? How had I not protected my son? The horror and guilt consumed me, but I knew I needed to be strong, for Michael. "This will never happen again," I promised, hugging him tightly. "We're leaving here today." "To where?" he asked through tears. I had no answer for that. We couldn't go back to Oakville. The house had already been handed over, and the life we had there no longer existed. We had no money, we had nowhere to go. But I knew with absolute certainty that we could not spend even one more night under the same roof as Edward. "I don't know yet," I replied, with a confidence that was far from what I felt. "But we'll find a way. Trust me." I spent the rest of the day in a state of absolute alert. I gathered our most essential things in 2 small suitcases, clothes, documents, the little money I had saved. I left everything ready near the back door. I didn't know where we would go, but I knew we needed to leave before Edward returned at the end of the day. It was then that I remembered Lucy, one of the store's customers who had become a kind of friend in the last few weeks. She was a widow who lived alone in a large house not far from there. Maybe, just maybe, she could give us shelter for a night or two until I decided what to do. With Michael by my side, I went to Lucy's house. When she opened the door and saw our tense faces, our suitcases, she immediately understood that something was very wrong. "Come in, my dear," she said, making room. "What happened?" Through tears, I told her an edited version of the truth, that Edward was not the man I thought, that we had to get out of here as quickly as possible. I didn't go into details about what he had done to Michael. It was a freshly opened wound, too painful to be exposed. Lucy didn't ask questions. With a wisdom that only comes with age, she understood what was not said. "Stay here as long as you need," she offered. "I have a guest room that is rarely used. You'll be safe here." Her generosity moved me deeply. That night, Michael slept in the guest room, exhausted after the emotional turmoil of the day. I stayed awake, talking with Lucy in the kitchen, trying to elaborate a plan. "I have a sister in Springfield," said Lucy, after hearing my concerns about having nowhere to go. "She owns a small boarding house, always needing help. If you want, I can talk to her. I'm sure she would give you a room in exchange for work at the boarding house." It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. A possibility, a way out. "That would be wonderful," I replied, with a voice choked with emotion. The next day, Edward appeared at Lucy's house, furious. Someone in the neighborhood had seen us arriving there with suitcases, and he didn't take long to discover where we were. Lucy, that frail but determined lady, confronted him at the door. "They don't want to talk to you," she said firmly. "You'd better leave." "Clarice is my fiancé," shouted Edward. "And the boy is her son. I have every right to see them." At that moment, I came out to the hallway, leaving Michael safe in the room. "We have nothing more to talk about, Edward," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I know what you did. I know what you are." He visibly paled. For a moment, I thought he was going to deny it, that he was going to try to explain himself. But then, his face contorted into an expression of pure hatred. "You are nothing without me," he hissed. "You'll end up in the gutter, you and that lying boy." "I prefer the gutter to staying one more minute with you," I replied. "Now leave before I call the police." It was a bluff. I didn't have the courage to expose Michael to a police process, to make him relive the trauma by telling everything to strangers. But Edward didn't know that. With a last look of contempt, he turned and left. 3 days later, we were on the bus to Springfield, to our new life. Lucy had spoken with her sister Martha, who agreed to take us in. It would be a fresh start from zero once again. But this time, it would be just Michael and me, stronger, more united by what we had been through together. It was only a few weeks later, already settled in Martha's boarding house, that I began to feel the first symptoms: morning sickness, dizziness, tender breasts. I recognized the signs immediately. I was pregnant. The news fell like a bomb. A child of Edward's growing inside me, a constant reminder of the man who had destroyed our lives. How would I explain this to Michael? How would I raise this child, knowing who its father was? For days I struggled with these questions without finding answers. Then, without warning, my own body resolved the issue for me. Intense bleeding, abdominal pains that doubled me over. Martha took me hurriedly to the local hospital. "Spontaneous miscarriage," diagnosed the doctor after the exams. "It happens more frequently than one might imagine, especially in situations of great stress." As I recovered in the hospital bed, a strange sensation invaded me. It was relief. Relief mixed with a hint of sadness, because despite everything, it was a life that was lost. But mainly relief, because I wouldn't have to make the impossible decision about what to do with that pregnancy. "It's common," said the doctor, noticing my conflicted expression. "The body knows when it's not the time. When there's a lot of stress, a lot of anguish, it protects the woman in the way it can." Those words were a balm. It wasn't my fault. It was just life following its course, giving me the chance to heal my wounds before thinking about bringing another child into the world. I returned to the boarding house lighter, determined to focus on what really mattered: rebuilding our life, healing Michael's wounds, finding a path to move forward. The past would be left behind, with its pains and betrayals. The future, that was in our hands, and I would do everything to make it better than everything we had lived until then. The first months in Springfield were of adaptation and healing. Martha's boarding house was on a quiet street, close to the center of town. It was an old mansion with 6 rooms for guests, mostly commercial travelers who spent few days in the city. Martha gave us a small room in the back, with 2 twin beds and a simple wardrobe. It wasn't much, but it was ours, a safe place where we could start over. In exchange for lodging and food, I began to work at the boarding house, cleaning the rooms, washing bedding, helping in the kitchen. The work was hard, but it kept me busy, and that was good. The less time I had to think about the past, the better. Michael was enrolled in the local school, and to my relief, he seemed to be adapting well. Martha, an energetic lady in her 60s, had a special way with him, always arranging small tasks that made him feel useful and valued. The nights, however, were difficult. Michael had frequent nightmares, woke up screaming, soaked in sweat. I would run to hug him, to assure him that everything was fine, that we were safe now. Sometimes he calmed down quickly. Other times, he spent hours trembling in my arms, unable to go back to sleep. On one of these nights, after a particularly intense nightmare, he finally began to talk about what had happened in Riverdale. He said he would send me away if I told, he whispered, still clinging to me as if his life depended on it. He said you would be angry with me, that you would think it was my fault. Never, ever would it be your fault, I replied, with a voice choked with emotion. You are the victim here, my son. He is the monster, not you. It was the first of many painful conversations we had about what occurred. Little by little, with great care, Michael revealed details of the abuse, always in a fragmented way, always with great difficulty. And with each revelation, my heart broke a little more, both for the pain my son had suffered and for the guilt I felt for not having noticed sooner, for not having been able to protect him. Martha, noticing our silent struggle, suggested that we seek help. I know a lady, Mrs. Angela, who works at the church. She's not a doctor, but she studied psychology, helps many people here in town with difficult problems. At first, I hesitated. Exposing our wounds to a stranger seemed frightening, but when Michael's nightmares began to affect his performance at school as well, I realized we needed professional help. Mrs. Angela was a middle-aged woman with a gentle face and perceptive eyes. She received us in a small room at the back of the church, decorated with simplicity but welcoming. I let Michael talk to her alone, at her own suggestion. Sometimes it's easier for the child to speak when the parents aren't present, she explained. After the first sessions, Mrs. Angela asked to speak with me privately. Your son has suffered a severe trauma, she said, without beating around the bush. It will take time for him to process all this, to understand that he wasn't at fault. But he is strong, Clarice, and he has you by his side. That makes all the difference. Those words gave me a glimpse of hope. Michael continued seeing Mrs. Angela weekly, and gradually I noticed small changes. The nightmares became less frequent. He began to smile occasionally, to take an interest in things around him. Meanwhile, my own recovery was a slower and lonelier process. In the few free hours I had, I would sit in the small garden at the back of the boarding house, trying to process everything that had happened, trying to understand how my life had taken so many turns in such a short time. The loss of the pregnancy, although it had been a relief in many aspects, also brought complicated feelings. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about what that child would have been like, if it would have had Edward's eyes or mine, if the miscarriage had really been natural, or if my own body had rejected that life because of the stress and pain. Martha, with her life wisdom, noticed my internal struggle. Time heals everything, she would say, as we had coffee in the kitchen in the early hours of the morning before the guests woke up. "But you need to let the wound breathe, understand? You can't keep all that pain inside you." It was with her that I began to open up a little each day. I told her about my childhood in Oakville, about my mother's death, about how I met William and how I lost him so early. I told her about Edward, about how he seemed to be everything I could want in a companion, and how that illusion fell apart in the cruelest way possible. "Men like him are predators," said Martha, after hearing my complete story. "They know exactly what to say, how to act to gain our trust. And then, when they have what they want, they show their true face." 4 months after our arrival in Springfield, I received a letter from David. It had taken a while to find us, as he didn't know where we had gone. It was only when he contacted Lucy's family that he got our address. "Things aren't going well around here," he wrote. "Dad passed away last month. His liver finally couldn't take it anymore. The house was sold to pay debts. I'm thinking of moving to Cincinnati. I have a friend there who can arrange work for me. And you? How are you? Why did you leave Riverdale so suddenly? Edward came here, looked for me. He was furious, said terrible things about you and about Michael. I didn't believe him, of course, but I was worried. What really happened?" That letter left me in a state of shock. My father's death, although not completely unexpected given his alcoholism, was still a blow. And knowing that Edward had gone to Oakville, that he had spoken with David, that he continued to spread lies about us, it was as if the past refused to stay behind. I replied to the letter carefully, telling only the essentials: that Edward was not the man we thought, that he had treated us badly, and that we decided to start over somewhere else. I didn't mention the abuse. That was a wound that belonged to Michael, and only he could decide, when he was older, if he wanted to share it with others. The news of my father's death brought up yet another turmoil of complicated emotions. We never had a close relationship, especially after he gave himself over to drink. But still, he was my father, and now he was gone. I felt a diffuse sadness, not so much for the loss itself, but for what could have been and never was. It was during this period of confused mourning that an unexpected event shook our fragile stability even more. Michael returned from school one day with a bruised face, a black eye, a split lip. I ran to him as soon as I saw him enter, alarmed. "What happened? Who did this to you?" He moved away from my touch, his gaze down, his posture defensive. "Some boys from school. They said that my father was... that I was..." His voice failed. The tears began to fall. "They said I was the son of a tramp who didn't even know who my father was." I was paralyzed with horror. How would those children know our story? Springfield was a small city, but still we had been discreet about our past. "Who said that, Michael? Where did they get that idea?" Between sobs, he told me, a new teacher had arrived at the school, coming from Riverdale, and he brought with him stories, malicious gossip about the woman who ran away with her son after robbing her fiancé. "Edward," I murmured, feeling the blood freeze. Even hundreds of miles away, that man continued to pursue us, to poison our lives. That same afternoon, I went to the school to speak with the principal. I explained the situation, not mentioning the abuse, but making it clear that we had left Riverdale to escape a dangerous situation, and that the gossip was hurting my son. The principal, an understanding man, promised to speak with the teacher and take measures regarding the bullying. But the damage was already done. Michael refused to return to school in the following days. He stayed in the room, curled up in bed, saying he was sick. When I insisted, he exploded. "I don't want to go back there, ever! They keep looking at me, whispering. They know what he did to me." "No, son, they don't know," I tried to calm him. "Nobody knows except us and Mrs. Angela. They're just malicious gossip, invented by Edward to hurt us." But Michael wasn't convinced. His fear that everyone knew, that everyone judged him, was greater than any rational argument I could offer. It was the lowest point of our new life in Springfield. Michael refused to leave the room. I divided myself between work at the boarding house and constant worry about him. Martha, always solicitous, brought food to him, tried to cheer him up with stories and small gifts, but nothing seemed to help. On a particularly difficult night, after Michael finally fell asleep exhausted from so much crying, I sat on the small porch at the back of the boarding house, looking at the starry sky, feeling completely lost. How could we overcome this? How could I protect my son from the evil that Edward continued to do, even at a distance? It was then that Martha joined me, sitting in the chair beside me, offering me a cup of chamomile tea. "You need to leave," she said, after a few minutes of shared silence. I looked at her, surprised. "What?" "Springfield is too small," she explained with a sigh. "Gossip spreads quickly here. Even if you manage to convince people that Edward is lying, the seed of doubt has already been planted. You need a bigger place, where you can really start over, where nobody knows you." The idea of another move, another restart, seemed overwhelming. We were just beginning to establish ourselves here. But deep down, I knew that Martha was right. Springfield had become a toxic place for Michael, a place where he felt exposed, vulnerable. "Where would we go?" I asked, more to myself than to her. "I have a cousin in Riverdale," replied Martha. "Irene. She has a clothing store there, always needing a good seamstress. And the city is big enough for you to lose yourselves in the crowd, understand? Nobody needs to know where you came from, what you've been through." Riverdale. The name of the city where everything had gone wrong now emerged as a possible salvation. The irony didn't escape me. "But what about Edward?" I asked, alarmed. "He might still be there." Martha shook her head. "Irene wrote to me a few weeks ago. His store closed, he returned to Madison. Apparently he got into trouble with some creditors, had to leave in a hurry." The news should have brought me relief, but all I felt was a deep fatigue. Once again, we would have to gather our few belongings and set out for the unknown. Once again, we would have to adapt, rebuild, restart. "I'll think about it," I told Martha, finishing my tea. "I need to talk to Michael, see what he thinks." The conversation with Michael was easier than I expected. When I mentioned the possibility of us moving to Riverdale, his eyes lit up for the first time in days. "To where he isn't anymore?" he asked, to confirm. "Yes, he's gone. We would go to a different neighborhood, a different school. Nobody would know who we are, where we came from." He thought for a moment, then nodded. "I want to go. I want to get out of here." The decision was made. Martha wrote to Irene, who replied quickly, confirming that she would have work for me at the store and that she could help us find a place to live. We prepared our departure for the end of that month, June 1974. In the days leading up to our departure, I noticed a change in Michael. It was as if the prospect of a new beginning, away from gossip and looks, had renewed something inside him. He began to talk more, to take an interest in what was happening around him. He even agreed to have a final session with Mrs. Angela, who gave him some techniques to deal with fear and anxiety in the new city. On the eve of our departure, as we packed our few things, Michael surprised me with a question. "Mom, when we get to Riverdale, can we say that my father died in the war, like Joaquin's father from school?" The question caught me by surprise. "What war, son? We're not at war." He shrugged. "Any war. I just don't want to say I don't have a father. I don't want them to ask me questions." I understood then what he was asking. A simple, acceptable story that would avoid complicated and painful explanations. A story that would protect him from curious looks and uncomfortable questions. "We can say that your father died when you were a baby," I suggested. "We don't need to invent a war. Just say that he got sick, that it was very sad, but that we moved on. It's close enough to the truth." He nodded, seeming satisfied with this solution. "And if they ask about Edward? If someone from Oakville finds us? We'll say it was a mistake, that it didn't work out. We don't need to go into details, Michael. Our story belongs to us, understand? We don't owe explanations to anyone." That night, for the first time in months, Michael slept without nightmares. And when I woke up the next morning, I found him already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed, the small suitcase closed beside him. "I'm ready," he said, with a determination that moved me. He was just an 8-year-old boy, but he had already faced more pain and trauma than many adults face in their entire lives. We said goodbye to Martha with tears in our eyes and promises to keep in touch. She had been more than just a hostess for us. She had been a friend, a counselor, an anchor in turbulent times. "You're going to be fine," she said, hugging us one last time before we boarded the bus. "You're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this time, finally, we would find the peace and stability we so desired. That in Riverdale, we could really leave the past behind and build a better future. The bus departed, taking us to yet another fresh start, another chance. Beside me, Michael looked out the window, his eyes fixed on the landscape that passed by quickly. I didn't know what he was thinking, what he was feeling. But when he took my hand and squeezed it slightly, I knew that, regardless of what the future held, we would face it together. "Everything's going to be all right this time, Mom," he said, with a confidence that didn't match his age. "You'll see." And at that moment, with the morning sun illuminating my son's face, allowing me to see a glimpse of the man he would one day become, I allowed myself to believe that yes, everything would be all right. That the wounds would heal, that the nightmares would end, that we would find our place in the world. That life, despite everything it had taken from us, still had much to offer. We arrived in Riverdale on a warm afternoon in June 1974. The city had once been the stage of so much suffering for us, but now, with Edward gone, it would be the setting for our recovery. Irene, Martha's cousin, was waiting for us at the bus station, a robust woman with gray hair and an easy smile who hugged us as if we were relatives she hadn't seen in a long time. "Martha told me you've been through difficult times," she said as she took us to her house, "but that's all behind you now. Here, you can truly start over." Irene lived alone in a simple but comfortable 2-story house with the clothing store Women's Elegance on the ground floor. For the first few days, we stayed with her until we found our own place. I started working at the store immediately, applying the sewing skills I learned from my mother and had perfected over the past few years. During the first months, our priority was stability. Michael needed a safe routine, away from any reminder of what he had experienced. We found a small apartment to rent, and he was enrolled in a school different from where he had studied before. We followed the plan we had elaborated. For all intents and purposes, we were new to the city. Michael was William's son, who had passed away when he was a baby. Irene became much more than an employer. She was a mentor, a friend, sometimes almost a mother to me. At night, after the store closed, we shared stories of our lives. It was through her that I met Mrs. Nancy, a lady who taught crafts in a small studio in the center of town. "You have talent with your hands, Clarice," Irene said one day. "You shouldn't limit yourself to clothing alterations. Why don't you learn something new?" At first, I hesitated. I had so many concerns, so many responsibilities. But Irene insisted, offering to look after Michael on Saturday afternoons while I attended the classes. That's how, at 27, I discovered a new passion: crochet and embroidery crafts. Mrs. Nancy was a patient teacher, and under her guidance I began to create increasingly elaborate pieces: doilies, decorative dish towels, small rugs. Soon, some of Irene's store customers began to take an interest in my work. "You should sell your pieces at the Sunday market," suggested Irene. "There are lots of tourists who come for the fishing festival and look for souvenirs to take home." The idea both frightened and excited me. It would be venturing into unknown territory, but also a chance to have my own income, to build something that was completely mine. On a Sunday morning in October 1974, I set up my first small stand at the downtown market. I had only 10 pieces to sell: 5 embroidered dish towels and 5 small crochet doilies. To my surprise, I sold everything before noon. People praised the finishing, the delicacy of the stitches, the original designs. "Do you take custom orders?" asked an elegant lady after buying 2 doilies. I'm looking for something special for my daughter's trousseau. It was my first big order, a complete table set with tablecloth, napkins, and runners, all in white linen with cross-stitch embroidery. I worked on that trousseau for almost a month, and when I delivered it, the customer was so satisfied that she referred me to several friends. Meanwhile, Michael was also beginning to flourish at the new school. The teacher, Mrs. Carman, was especially attentive to him, noticing his withdrawn nature. With patience and affection, she encouraged him to participate in activities, to make friends. Gradually, my son emerged from the shell he had hidden in since the abuse. One day, coming home from school, he surprised me with a genuine smile, something I hadn't seen in so long that I had almost forgotten what it was like. "I was chosen for the baseball team," he told me, proud. "The coach said I'm good at bat." That small moment of joy was like a beacon at the end of a long, dark tunnel. Yes, there was hope. Yes, we could overcome what had happened. In 1975, about a year after our arrival in Riverdale, Irene made me a proposal that would change our lives. "I'm thinking of expanding the store," she said. "I want to open a space for crafts in the back, and I thought of you to manage this part. It would be a partnership. You contribute the work, and I provide the space and initial materials. What do you think?" The proposal was both generous and frightening. It would be a big commitment, an enormous responsibility, but also an opportunity to grow, to build something lasting. "I need to think," I replied honestly. "Talk to Michael." That night, I explained the situation to my son, now 9 years old, trying to be as clear as possible about what it would mean. More work for me, perhaps less time together at the beginning, but also more financial stability, the possibility of a better future. "You should accept, Mom," he said, surprising me with his maturity. "You're happy when you make those crochet things." The simple and direct observation touched me deeply. It was true. Crafting had become more than a job for me. It was a form of expression, almost a therapy. In the hours when I concentrated on the intricate stitches, on the colors and textures, I managed to momentarily forget everything else, finding a peace that seemed impossible after everything we had been through. I accepted Irene's proposal. In the months that followed, we worked together on renovating the space, buying materials, creating a small catalog of products. In March 1976, we inaugurated the Craft Corner in the back of the Women's Elegance store. The business grew quickly. Soon, it wasn't just me producing. I began to buy pieces from other craftswomen in the region, transforming the space into a kind of informal cooperative. I discovered that I had a talent not only for creating, but also for teaching and coordinating. I began to offer small crochet and embroidery courses in the back of the store on Saturdays. It was in one of these courses that I met Beatrice, a young teacher recently arrived in the city. She came from Cincinnati, where she had taught for a few years, and now was taking a position at Michael's school. "Your son is a special boy," she commented after a few crochet classes. "Very intelligent, but sometimes he seems sad, distant." The observation caught me off guard. I thought Michael was overcoming the past well, but perhaps I was seeing only what I wanted to see. "He's been through difficult times," I replied vaguely. "He lost his father very early." Beatrice nodded, understanding. "My sister is a child psychologist," she commented. "She works with children who have been through trauma. If you want, I can give you her contact." The mention of trauma frightened me. Was it so obvious that Michael carried wounds? But after reflecting, I realized I was being naive. Of course, the marks were still there, no matter how much we tried to pretend they weren't. A few days later, I sought out Beatrice and asked for her sister's contact. Claire, the psychologist, practiced in Cincinnati but came to Riverdale twice a month. We scheduled an initial consultation just for me. I wanted to better understand how I could help my son. The meeting with Claire was revealing. For the first time, I spoke openly about everything that had happened, the abuse, our escape, the attempts to start over. She listened attentively, without judgments, occasionally asking questions that helped me organize my thoughts. "You two have been through extremely traumatic experiences," she said at the end. "It's admirable how you've managed to rebuild your lives. But trauma doesn't disappear just because we decide not to talk about it. It finds other ways to manifest itself." She explained to me that Michael was probably suppressing many emotions, keeping them inside because he believed this would protect me. Children who go through abuse often feel responsible for protecting their parents, especially when they perceive that what happened caused suffering to the family, she said. I left that first meeting with a mixture of emotions. Guilt for not having realized sooner that Michael was still suffering, fear of what the future might bring, but also a strange relief for finally facing the situation head on. In the weeks that followed, I took Michael to meet Claire. Initially, he resisted the idea of therapy. "I'm not crazy, Mom," he protested. But Claire had a special way with children. Instead of traditional sessions, she proposed meetings where they played, drew, talked about seemingly trivial subjects. Gradually, Michael opened up. The sessions with Claire became a regular part of our lives. Every 2 weeks, we would take the bus to Cincinnati, spend the morning there, and then take advantage of the day to do a little sightseeing, transforming the day into a kind of adventure. These visits to Cincinnati had an unexpected benefit. They brought me closer to my brother David, who had moved there after our father's death. He was working at a pharmacy in the center of town and had married a local girl. It was an emotional reunion, so many years apart, so many stories to tell. David was shocked when, finally, I told him the truth about what had happened with Edward. "I should have noticed," he lamented. "There was something about that man that never seemed right to me." "Don't blame yourself," I replied. "He fooled us all. The important thing is that we're fine now, we're safe." And we really were. The therapy was helping Michael, the business was thriving, we had friends, a community around us. It was as if, finally, life was giving us a break, a chance to breathe and exist without fear. In 1978, 4 years after our arrival in Riverdale, I made an important decision. It was time to have my own space. With the savings I had managed to accumulate and a small loan from the bank, I rented a small shop in the center of town, not far from the main square. Clarice's Crafts opened its doors in May of that year. It was a small space, but welcoming, where I sold my creations and those of other local craftswomen. Irene, far from feeling betrayed, was my biggest supporter. "You deserve to fly with your own wings," she said. The day of the inauguration was one of the happiest of my life. Michael, now 12 years old, helped arrange the shelves, put on the prices, decorate the windows. David and his wife came from Cincinnati, especially for the occasion. Friends, loyal customers, everyone showed up to celebrate. At night, after everyone had left, I stayed alone in the store for a moment, looking around, hardly believing that all this was mine. The fruit of my work, my perseverance. I remembered the girl from Oakville, who dreamed of being a teacher, who had so little and who had lost so much. If someone had told me at that time that one day I would have my own business, I probably would have laughed in disbelief. Life is like that, full of surprises. Sometimes it takes us on paths we would never have imagined, some too painful, others unexpectedly beautiful. The important thing is not to give up, to keep walking, one step at a time. That night, locking the door of my store for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not just for what I had achieved materially, but for the woman I had become. Strong, resilient, able to protect my son and rebuild our lives from the ashes. It was a feeling of power, not the power that hurts or controls, but the power that comes from within, that is born of overcoming, of the certainty that, whatever happens, we will find a way. It was the power of knowing that, despite everything, we were not victims, but survivors. And then, with that certainty in my heart, I returned home to the small apartment where Michael was waiting for me, to the place that, finally, we could call home. Today, at 78, I look back and barely recognize the frightened young woman who fled Springfield with a traumatized son and just a suitcase of clothes. Life has a way of transforming us so gradually that we only notice the change when we stop to contemplate the path traveled. My little shop, Clarice's Crafts, is still here on Main Street in Riverdale, though now it occupies a larger space than the original. Over time, we expanded not only the size, but also the products. In addition to crochet and embroidery, we began to offer other types of crafts: ceramics, fabric painting, decorative pieces. It became a meeting point for craftswomen in the region, a space where local talents can showcase their work. I don't work as much as before, of course. Age comes with its limitations. My daughter Catherine helps me manage the business now. She's the one who takes care of the paperwork, the purchases, the organization of the courses we offer in the back of the store. But I still make a point of coming every day, even if just for a few hours. I sit in my rocking chair, the same one that has been with me for 30 years, and work on some special piece, usually custom orders from old customers who insist that they'll only accept the work if it's made by Miss Clarice. Catherine was born in 1980, when I was already 33 years old. It was a surprise in many ways. After everything I'd been through, I didn't expect to become romantically involved with anyone, much less start a new family. But life has its own plans. I met August in 1979 when he came to the store to order a gift for his mother. He was a quiet man, soft-spoken, a few years older than me. A widower without children, he worked as an accountant at a local company. We started talking by chance during his visits to the store, and gradually a friendship formed. It was Michael, surprisingly, who encouraged me to accept when August invited me for coffee. "He seems nice, Mom," said my son, then 13 years old, "and you deserve to be happy." Our relationship developed slowly, with respect and patience. August knew about my past. Not all the details, but enough to understand my fears and hesitations. He never pressured me, never demanded more than I was ready to give. We married in a simple ceremony, just with close friends and family, when I discovered I was pregnant with Catherine. It was a new beginning in so many ways. A new love, a new family, a new chance to experience motherhood in completely different circumstances. August was a loving husband and a dedicated stepfather to Michael. He never tried to replace the memory of William, but built his own relationship with my son, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The two got along well, sharing an interest in baseball and fishing. We lived together for 28 years, until a heart attack took him in 2007. It was a profound loss, but different from the others I had faced in life. This time, I had adult and independent children by my side, loyal friends, a community that supported me. The pain was no less intense, but I was better equipped to deal with it. Michael followed his own path in life. After therapy with Claire, which continued for several years, he managed to overcome much of the childhood trauma. He graduated in civil engineering in Cincinnati, worked in several cities, and ended up settling in Columbus, where he met his wife, Louise. They don't have children. A conscious choice of both. "I don't feel prepared to be a father," Michael confessed to me once. "I'm afraid of not being able to protect a child." I understand his fear, although it saddens me to think that the wounds of the past still influence his decisions. But I respect his choice. He is a good man, balanced, successful in his career. He comes to visit us regularly, brings gifts for his sister and niece, and we talk on the phone almost every week. Catherine, on the other hand, followed a path more similar to mine. She always showed interest in crafts, learning to embroider with me from an early age. After trying a few courses in college, she decided that her place was indeed at Clarice's Crafts. She modernized the business, created a website for online sales, expanded our clientele beyond the borders of Riverdale. She married young to Robert, a local history teacher, and soon they had Isabella, who today, at 25, is completing her medical residency in Cincinnati. My granddaughter is my joy, my pride, my hope for the future. I see in her all the strength and determination that I needed to find in myself so many times throughout life. My day-to-day now is peaceful, filled with small joys. I wake up early, prepare my coffee, read a little. I've learned to enjoy novels, especially historical ones. Then I come to the store, where I spend a few hours working on my crochet pieces, chatting with old customers, teaching techniques to younger craftswomen. Sometimes, when the afternoon is cool, I sit in the central square with my friends, Irene, now over 90, but still lucid and full of stories; Beatrice, retired from the school, but active in social projects; and other ladies who, like me, have seen this city grow and transform over the decades. My home, a small 2-story house not far from the store, is my refuge. After August passed away and Catherine got married, I thought about moving to a smaller place. But there are too many memories there. In the walls we painted together, in the garden we planted, in the furniture we chose. It's the home I built after so long without having a place to call my own. In recent years, I began to record my memories. Not to publish or share widely, but to leave a record for Isabella, so she knows her family history, her roots. I write a little each day, remembering not only the difficult moments, but also the joys, the achievements, the small victories that made me who I am today. I don't hold grudges from the past. It would be easy to let bitterness take over after everything I lived through. But I chose forgiveness, not for those who hurt me, but for myself. Forgiving was the way I found to free myself, to not allow those who hurt me to continue having power over my life. Looking back, I see that life is like a patchwork quilt, made of pieces of different colors and textures. Some pieces are dark, representing moments of pain and loss. Others are vibrant, full of joy and fulfillment. Together, they form a cohesive whole, a unique story that could only be mine. Today, sitting in the back room of my store, with the afternoon light coming through the windows and illuminating my hands that continue to create, to transform threads into art, I feel a deep peace. It's not the peace of someone who has never faced storms, but the peace of someone who has learned to dance in the rain, to find beauty even in the darkest moments. This is my life today. Simple, peaceful, filled with small joys and moments of gratitude. A life that I built with my own hands, one stitch at a time, just like the pieces I create in my crochet, with patience, persistence, and love. My dear friends, in sharing my story with you, I don't seek to arouse pity or admiration. What I wish from my heart is that my experiences might serve in some way those who face their own challenges, their own dark nights of the soul. If you're going through difficult times, if you feel there's no way out, that the pain is too great to bear, I want you to know, you are stronger than you imagine. There is within you a resilience that perhaps you haven't yet discovered, an ability to survive and rebuild that only reveals itself when we are truly tested. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start each day anew. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. And believe me, life has taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never completely goes out. When Edward abused my son and destroyed our life in Riverdale, I thought I would never be able to smile again. The weight of guilt for not having protected Michael was crushing. As a mother, I felt I had failed in the most fundamental task, keeping my child safe. But with time, with professional help, and with much love, I learned that the guilt wasn't mine. The only guilty one was the aggressor. If you're experiencing something similar, if your child has been a victim of abuse, understand, you are not alone. Seek help immediately. Talk to qualified professionals, people who can guide you on the path to recovery. The first step is recognizing the problem, no matter how painful it is to face it. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. This inner strength, this resilience, is within each of you too, waiting to be awakened when necessary. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. Today, when I look at Michael, at the man of integrity and balance he has become, I feel a pride that words cannot express. Yes, he carries scars. Yes, some decisions in his adult life were shaped by childhood trauma. But he didn't let himself be defined by what he suffered. He built a meaningful life, with purpose, with love. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. When I fled with Michael that afternoon, not knowing where to go or how we would survive, I made a choice, the choice to fight, to protect my son at any cost, to not accept that tragedy would be the final chapter of our story. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. Each time we started over, in Springfield, then in Riverdale again, was an act of courage, of resistance, of hope in the future. And each restart became a little easier than the previous one, because we were learning to trust in our ability to move forward. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. This healing journey isn't linear. There are good days and bad days, moments of progress and moments of setback. The important thing is to keep walking, one step at a time, without demanding perfection from yourself. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. For many years, I kept our story as a shameful secret. Today, I understand that talking about what we lived through not only liberates us, but can help other people who are at the beginning of their own recovery journey. Age has given me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. When I met August at 32, I believed that my chance to build a happy family had been left behind. But life surprised me, gave me a new opportunity to experience love, to raise my daughter Catherine in a healthy environment, to witness the growth of my granddaughter Isabella. My experience has taught me that our story doesn't end with the painful chapters. There's always a new page to be written, a possibility of redemption, of joy, of fulfillment. Even in the most adverse circumstances, we can find reasons to move forward, to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each genuine smile, each moment of peace, each achievement, small or large, is a victory against those who tried to destroy us. There is no greater triumph than building a full and meaningful life after having known rock bottom. And you, my dear viewers, who have dedicated your time to know my journey, I want to ask something from the heart. If you know someone who is suffering violence or abuse, don't remain silent. Don't turn your back thinking that it's not your business. A gesture of support, a word of encouragement, a hand extended at the right moment can literally save lives. Share this video immediately with whoever you think needs to hear this message. Remember that many people are suffering in silence, thinking there's no way out, that nobody will believe them, that they are alone. Show them they're not, that there is hope, that there is life, a full and happy life after trauma. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell now to not miss any story of overcoming. Each testimony like mine can be the light someone needs to find courage and change their own story. By subscribing, you're not just supporting this work, you're helping to create a support network for people who are going through similar situations. Leave in the comments, which part of my story touched your heart the most? Sharing our reflections creates a community of support, where people from different walks of life can meet, understand each other, and strengthen each other mutually. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Because, my dears, what I never told anyone until today is that in the darkest nights, when despair seemed to swallow me, I thought about ending it all, taking Michael with me to a place where no one could hurt us again. It was just a thread of hope, as thin as the threads I use in my crochet, that prevented me from committing the irreparable. And that same thread, strengthened day by day, ended up weaving the life I have today.